Well, the message this morning is not specifically a Memorial Day message. I've seldom done that, although it is in a context of Memorial Day. And we'll make some explanation of that statement as we move along here this morning. The title of the message, as I have printed, is Reflections on Faith. And just as last week we looked at reflections on hope, that kind of keeps the door open for me to share most anything that occurs to me to share on the subject of faith. Reflection just means these are some thoughts that I've had this past week or leading up to this week. So we are going to be kind of all over the place a little bit as we look at this matter of faith. In some ways, what I want to suggest this morning is that maybe we're going to look at the idea of faith through a few different lenses. Now, you understand how the lens you look through can have an impact on how you see, right? You've heard the expression, looking through rosy-colored glasses. Well, we normally mean if someone is described as looking at life through rosy-tinted glasses, we mean that they have a very positive, almost Pollyanna-type attitude towards life. Oh, everything's fine, everything's peachy, or in this case, rosy. And is it really? Well, that's how it looks when you're looking through rose-tinted glasses. Now, we know that it's not just talking about the color. I mean, that actually would look kind of strange if everyone had kind of yeah, Donna, okay. Donna thinks that would be pretty cool. She loves pink. So you understand the point. The lenses we look through impact how and what we see. And sometimes it's good to look at ideas through certain lenses, not to distort, but some lenses can actually enhance how we see, because we can get stuck sometimes looking at something from one perspective and one perspective alone. You understand, you've no doubt heard the illustration of the blind men who encountered an elephant. And of course, one of them puts his hand against one of the elephant's legs and says, "Oh, an elephant must be like a tree." And another one grabs hold of the trunk and says, "No, an elephant must be like a snake." And someone else grabs the tail. "No, an elephant is like a rope." And the question is, well, which one was right? Well, they all were to some extent, but all of them very incomplete. Sometimes looking at different perspectives, sometimes changing out the lenses can help to enhance our understanding of things. Well, the three lenses I want to look at faith through this morning are the lens of last week's theme. I want to look at faith in relation to hope. Then I want to look at faith through the lens of Memorial Day. And then thirdly, I want to look at faith through the lens of a book that I've been reading, I'll say rereading lately. Okay? And all of this, starting with the scriptures that calls us to a life of faith. The scriptures in the passage we read from Hebrews that defines faith for us. It says faith is the evidence of things hoped for, the substance of things not seen. Now that's nice and poetic. It doesn't tell us a whole lot without a lot more digging. Another translation that we read this morning, faith shows the reality of what we hope for. It is the evidence of things we cannot see. Again, still doesn't really define it. It does tell us that it's important, as we read further, and says, without faith it's impossible to please God. Whoever would come to him must believe that he exists and that he rewards those who earnestly or sincerely seek him. So we're certainly told it's impossible, and that faith has something to do with believing. Having faith, something about believing that God exists, believing that he matters, that he rewards those who earnestly seek him. Well, hope also deals with what is unseen. As we looked at that last week, that in Romans 8 it talks about if we have something, we don't hope for it anymore. That hope also is dealing with what is important to us that we can't see or we don't have in our possession. So looking at faith through the lens of hope, what is the difference between faith and hope? They definitely overlap a lot. But I want to suggest one distinction that maybe can help us in processing. I want to suggest that, well, maybe more than one. They'll kind of overlap here a little bit. I want to suggest that perhaps hope is a little bit more a matter of our emotions, no less significant. And I want to suggest that faith is a little bit more rational, in other words, dealing with the mind and decisions of the mind. Now, let's take that another step. I would say that hope, being a little more connected with the emotional centers of our being, that hope has more to do with the strength to live or the will to live. It's really hard to keep on living without some sense of hope, or at least to want to live without some sense of hope. Hope gives us that strength to live. But just the fact that we have hope doesn't really tell us how to live, does it? That's where faith comes in, faith being more rational. Faith guides us more in how we live our life. We described last week hope as being able to identify a path from where we are to where we'd like to be. That actually there is a way to get from where I am to where I want to be. And the fact that we come to identify that a path does exist, that gives us hope of the possibility of actually reaching that destination sometime. Faith is a little bit more that something exists that we cannot see. And certainly biblical faith is focused on a person. It's not just faith in terms of what we call blind faith. It's not just a faith that has no substance to it. It's not just optimism. It's not just like hope. Someone could say, I've got a lot of hope today. I feel really good. I feel like I'm going to get $1 million today. Okay, there can be hope that really has no basis to it. It's just wishful thinking. There can be faith similar that is empty, that has no basis to it, that really isn't faith, that just says, I know it's all going to be okay. And maybe has no substance to it. Now, can we say that with deep conviction? Can that be an expression of faith? I know it's going to be okay because of what? Because I have faith in a God who created this universe, a God who is with me every moment of every day, a God who I believe is active in this world with purpose and is active in my life with purpose, and I have come to know him in a way that lets me trust him. Now, I still can't see him, but that's very different to say it's going to be okay. I may go through some horrible experiences. I may face tragedy. All kinds of things may happen today, but because of my faith in a person, I can say that it's going to be okay. I can't prove it. I accept that by faith. But you understand the difference. We can talk about having hope and having faith with no foundation. Ultimately, our faith is as good as the object in which it rests. You could say, I know it's all going to be okay because I trust Pastor Mark. Don't put that on me. I mean, you could have that attitude, and that could give you a lot of confidence, but I'm going to fail you. Not on purpose, but I'm going to fail you. Your faith is only as good as as the object in which it rests. Another aspect of faith. Faith, of course, we talk about is believing, it's trusting. Scripture calls us, God calls us to walk by faith, not by sight, to trust in what God has revealed of himself, not just what our eyes can see. We understand that faith is believing even when we can't see. But when we talk about faith, we're also not just talking about our faith in a person. But I want to suggest that when we talk about living by faith, we're also talking about what I would call the faith. We're talking about what God has revealed, not just that we're living our lives trusting him, but he has given us some principles by which to live. And so there's a sense in which when we talk about faith and faith showing us how to live, we're also talking about faith in principles. And this is the second lens that perhaps we can look through. When we think of Memorial Day and think, well, what does Memorial Day teach us about faith? It teaches us not only does faith show us how to live, but faith can give us a reason to be willing to die. Now that may sound a little bit twisted. We're talking about hope, having the will to live. Well, I think about those who have given their lives, service to their country. They've given their lives for their fellow man. Maybe they didn't know that they would when they signed up, but they knew that there was the risk of that. And they chose to take that risk. And I'm sure the reasons varied, but for the most part, those who chose to take that risk did so with a measure of faith. Faith, maybe they weren't believers in God. Maybe it wasn't that kind of a faith, but it was a certain faith in what I would call principles. Principles that were worth fighting for. Maybe it was the principles of liberty, the principles of justice. Principles that they believed that this country represented, and they were willing to give their lives. They were willing to serve in that way on behalf of those principles that were important to them, that they were so important that they felt these are worth putting my life at risk for. Now, certainly, as those who are followers of Jesus Christ, we have some higher principles. And once again, others will fail us. It's one thing to live and to be willing to die for principles like liberty or justice. It's another thing to do that in a way that says it's just for my country, right or wrong. And some of the lessons that we can learn at looking at any national holiday is to be able to honor those who have given their lives without letting it pull us into a blind nationalism. Because in the same way that I will fail you if you put your trust fully in me, our country will fail you if that's where your trust is. Our country is not above doing wrong. And I'm not going to get into a debate on when we have and when we haven't in the past. But I will stand by that statement. Our country is not above doing wrong, through individual leaders or collectively. And if we put our faith and trust and everything is our country first, we're going to fail. We're going to be failed. But as followers of Jesus Christ, we don't take that risk. We have principles that God has given us that show us how to live. We have principles that God has given us, truths that God has given us that are not only worth living by, but are worth dying for. In the same way that there are those who have given their lives for our country, there are those who have given their lives for the faith. And we call them martyrs. And it's happened centuries ago, and it continues to happen in different parts of the world. And modern communications has brought it right into our living rooms. As in the past few years, we've seen videotapes of people who, maybe we haven't watched them, but we've known that they exist, of people who, because of their faith in Christ, have been beheaded on film or who have been killed in other ways. Another lens through which to look at the faith that God calls us to. I want to suggest, in relation to Memorial Day, that we can live out our faith even as we honor those who have given their lives. We can honor their courage. We can honor their example. We can honor the gift and recognize the gift that they have given to us. And at the same time that we honor them, we can still grieve the war that brought it about. You understand how those two are possible? We can be grateful for the gift and still grieve the circumstances that brought it about. And not every war is equally noble. But even in the ones that are less noble, we can still be grateful for the gift and grieve the circumstances that made that even necessary. Refusing to consider that is what leads us into what I call blind nationalism, which I don't think there's any place for in a follower of Christ, no matter what country of which we're citizens. At the same time that we can honor our own dead and we can grieve the circumstances that brought that death about, we can also honor and respect the losses of other nations without diminishing our gratitude for those who died on our behalf. Does that make sense too? We can recognize that other nations lost their young. Even nations we were fighting against lost. And there were families, and there were individuals, and we can still grieve all of that. And we can guard in the Spirit of Christ against an attitude that says American blood is more valuable than the blood of any other race or any other nationality. We can be grateful for the nation in which we live. We can be grateful for those who have given their lives, and we can still have the heart of God towards all people. And we can grieve for those who have lost their lives in war, regardless of the fault, regardless of the circumstances. And we can respect those of other nations all at the same time. I mentioned a third lens that I wanted to look through for a few minutes this morning, and maybe that lens will help put some of this together. But it's kind of an interesting lens. As I said, it's a book that I've been rereading. It's a book called Have a Little Faith. Oh, I can see why that would be appropriate for a sermon on faith. Written by a man named Mitch Albom. Some of you have heard of him. Tuesdays with Maury, 5 People You Meet in Heaven, a few other books. You know he grew up Jewish? Not that that matters. Or does it? Okay. You don't have to answer that question. Actually, I'm glad you didn't. It's a delightful book. I recommend it. Mitch married a Christian woman. And he admits that once he left home, he pretty much left his faith as well, not left his heritage. It just just kind of wandered away from it. But things began to change when he had a couple encounters in life. And that's really what this book is about. One of those encounters was at one time back visiting his home in New Jersey, not that far from Philadelphia. He was back at his synagogue, which had changed a lot since when he was a young boy. And although the rabbi was the same, he was a whole lot older, but it was the same person. Now there were other rabbis, as it was larger than it had been some 30 years earlier. And this rabbi asked him a very unusual question. The rabbi knew who he was. He was an accomplished writer at that point, and living in Detroit, I think it was. And his rabbi asked him if when the time came, if Mitch would give his eulogy at his funeral. And Mitch said, well, he's thinking, I don't really know you, and why do you ask me? Well, I think you've got the gift of communication, and I think when the time comes, you'll know what to say. And for some reason, Mitch said yes to this invitation to give the eulogy. Of course, he said, "Now, you're not planning on this anytime soon?" And the rabbi said no. The rabbi's name was Albert Lewis. They always called him the Reb for some reason. I'm not even sure where that came from. And so Mitch thought, well, you know what? If I'm going to give the eulogy at this guy's funeral, I should probably spend some time with him and get to know him. So every time he came back home to New Jersey to visit his family, he would spend a day with the Reb, with Albert Lewis, in his declining years, and he got to know him real well. That's part of this book. Another part of this book is, won't go into all the story, but is a Christian pastor in the inner city in Detroit, where Mitch lived. He got to know him, and he had a very, very different story than his rabbi back home had. And these two men had equal and profound impact on Mitch's life, each one a little different. And so he wrote this book telling their stories and his own and how they intertwined. And the excerpts I want to share this morning are actually from his rabbi's story. They have to do with faith. On one visit, he asked his rabbi, this is one of the early ones, he said, do you believe in God? Interesting question to ask. His rabbi said, yes, I do. He said, do you ever speak to God? Yes, on a regular basis. Well, what do you say? These days, he sighed, then half sang his answers. These days I say, God, I know I'm going to see you soon, and we'll have some nice conversations. But meanwhile, God, if you're going to take me already. And if you're going to leave me here, he opened his hands and looked to the ceiling, maybe give me the strength to do what should be done. I like that expression of faith. I like that lens looking at faith. Do you believe in God? Yes, I do. Do you pray on a regular basis? Well, what do you say? God, I'm trusting you. I know I'm going to see you and we'll have some good conversation. But meanwhile, if you're going to take me, I'm ready. Take me already. If not, give me the strength for what needs to be done. It's another section of the book where the question was, how do you know God exists? I won't read all of that this morning, but just says he stopped, a smile crept across his face. An excellent question. And the answer, I said, that is Mitch speaking to him, well, first make the case against him. And so he listened while Mitch gave argument after argument of why perhaps someone could say there is no God. And he didn't try to answer every argument, but he basically said, He leaned in and said, "Now, it's my turn." He said, "Look, if you say that science will eventually prove there is no God, on that I must differ. No matter how small they take it back, to a tadpole, to an atom, there is always something they can't explain, something that created it all at the end of the search. And no matter how far they try to go the other way, to extend life, play around with the genes, clone this, clone that, live to 150, at some point life is over. And then what happens when life comes to an end? You see," he said, and leaned back and smiled, "when you come to the end, that's where God begins." Sometimes it's nice to look at faith through the lens of another person and hear their perspective and see their faith. There's another story in here that speaks a little bit to, as I said, about a Memorial Day and about honoring our own tradition and our own story, while at the same time respecting others and valuing life wherever we find it. I know in this country we haven't had a history nationally of issues between the United States and Israel as a nation, but I also know that there is a lot of history of conflict, bigotry, sometimes downright hatred between Christians and Jews. This particular story opens on a Sunday in their synagogue. You say Sunday in the synagogue? I thought they met on Saturday. Well, this year, one of the high holy days happened to fall on a Sunday. He writes, "And then there was the time when a member of the Reb's congregation, a German immigrant named Gunther Dreyfus, came racing in during a high holiday service and pulled the Reb aside. Gunther's face was ashen, his voice was shaking. 'What's wrong?' the Reb asked. Apparently, minutes earlier, Gunther had been outside overseeing the parking when the Catholic priest came stomping out and began to yell about all the cars parking by his church because it was a Sunday and he wanted the spaces for his members. 'Get them out of here,' he hollered, according to Gunther. 'You Jews, move your cars now.' 'But it's the high holy day,' Gunther said. 'Why must you have it on Sunday?' the priest yelled. 'Well, the date was set 3,000 years ago,' Gunther replied. Being an immigrant, he still spoke with a German accent. The priest glared at him, then uttered something almost beyond belief. 'They didn't exterminate enough of you.' Gunther was enraged. His wife had spent 3.5 years in a concentration camp. He wanted to slug the priest. Someone intervened, thankfully, and a shaken Gunther returned to the sanctuary. Well, the next day, the Reb phoned the Catholic archbishop who oversaw the area's churches and told him what had happened. The following day, the phone rang. It was the priest, asking if he could come over and talk. The Reb met him at the office door. They sat down. 'I want to apologize,' the priest said. 'Yes,' the Reb said. 'I should not have said what I did.' 'No, you should not have,' the Reb said. 'My archbishop had a suggestion,' the priest said. 'Well, what is that?' 'Well, as you know, our Catholic school is in session now, and they will have their recess soon.' The Reb listened. Then he nodded and stood up. And when the school doors opened and the kids burst out for recess, they saw the priest of St. Rose of Lima Catholic Church and the rabbi of Temple Beth Shalom walking arm in arm around the schoolyard. Some kids blinked, some kids stared, but all of them took notice. You might think that an uneasy truce, two men forced to walk around a schoolyard arm in arm. You might think a certain bitterness would haunt the relationship, but somehow in time they became friends. And years later, the Reb would be inside the Catholic Church at the priest's funeral, I was asked to help officiate, the Reb recalled. I recited a prayer for him, and I think by that time he might have thought it wasn't so bad. Yet our faith is more than just what we believe. That's important, and that's at the heart of it. But our faith is designed. We are called to a transformed life. We are called to be followers of Christ, not just naming him by name, but in the character of how we live. That affects everything. It affects our attitude towards those who might even hate us or speak ill of us. It affects our attitude towards our national enemies. It affects our attitude towards neighbors who don't want to get along. It affects everything. Looking at the lens of this rabbi's life, there's an awful lot of Christ-likeness in his character. And it can be a lesson for us to look at faith, to look at our faith through the lens of this man's life and the way that he lived, the way that he encountered others, his faith in God, his love for his fellow man, his refusal to live in animosity and in a spirit of hatred. Another story about when he went back to Europe for a visit at one time, and I won't read all of this, but somehow picked up a book, and it was an Arabic book, a school book in the rubble, and he kept it. For decades, he held on to that book, and he shows it to Mitch, to the author. And as he's describing where it came from, and he says, well, here, look through it. And he thumbs through it, and it's written in Arabic, but in the middle are some pictures, some photographs, black and whites of a family. And the point of that whole encounter was, well, why did you salvage that? Why did you hold on to it all these years? After all, they were the enemy, weren't they? And the rabbi says, enemy shenemy, or shnenemy, or however he did that. He said they were a family. That's what our faith teaches us. Not just what to believe, but how to live. To let the heartbeat of Christ beat inside of us. To love our enemies genuinely. To guide us in how we live. To give us the conviction with which we'd be willing to die if we were called to do that. Like I said, reflections on faith. Kind of scattered all over the place. But all part of our calling in Christ. Our God and Father, we thank you for our time together this morning, for the seeds of thought, the seeds of faith that you've planted in us even this day. Father, may the faith that we profess, the faith that Jesus modeled and taught us, the faith centered in him, may it be a faith that's less about building walls around us and more about building bridges to the hearts and lives of others. Just as through Christ, you built a bridge into our world, into our humanity. Father, again, may the heart of Christ dwell in us, in all that we do, this day and in the days to come. In his name we pray.